A storm is brewing over China, casting a long shadow over its cities and countryside alike. For decades, China has been seen as an unstoppable economic powerhouse, its cities pulsing with energy and ambition, its people driving relentless growth. But today, on June 14, 2025, the foundations of that powerhouse are showing deep and worrying cracks that threaten to upend the lives of millions. For months, a combination of internal weaknesses and mounting external pressures has been building into a full-blown crisis, shaking the confidence of business leaders and ordinary citizens alike. At the heart of this turmoil are staggering new tariffs imposed by the United States, a move that has sent shockwaves through China's vast manufacturing sector and disrupted global supply chains. These are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they represent shuttered factories, lost jobs, and broken promises, as entire communities face an uncertain future. The pain is real and immediate, fueling a wave of public anger that is now spilling onto the streets and cities across the nation. The very engine of China's growth, its export-oriented economy, is sputtering, threatening the livelihoods of millions and casting doubt on the country's future prosperity. Workers across the country are not getting paid, their savings dwindling as they struggle to provide for their families and keep hope alive. This simple, brutal fact has become the rallying cry for a growing protest movement, uniting people from all walks of life in a demand for change. This is a story of a nation at a crossroads, where the government's attempts to stimulate the economy clash with its instinct for tighter social control, and where every decision carries enormous risks. All the while, the world watches with bated breath, waiting to see what happens next in this unfolding drama that could reshape the global order. The latest chapter of this crisis began with a dramatic escalation in the US-China trade war. Tensions that had simmered for years suddenly boiled over, sending shockwaves through the global economy and setting the stage for a confrontation that would reshape industries on both sides of the Pacific. In early March 2025, the United States announced a sharp increase in tariffs on Chinese goods, raising them to 20%, then, by April, to a staggering 145%. The move was intended to pressure Beijing, but its effects rippled far beyond government halls, reaching deep into the heart of China's manufacturing sector. For China's export-driven economy, this was catastrophic. Factories producing everything from electronics to toys saw their American orders vanish overnight. The sudden disappearance of demand left warehouses overflowing with unsold goods and production schedules in chaos. Production lines ground to a halt, exacerbating overcapacity and deepening deflation. Machines that once hummed with activity now sat silent, and the uncertainty spread quickly through supply chains, affecting suppliers and logistics companies as well. Factory owners, already on thin margins, faced impossible choices: absorb massive losses or shut down. Many tried to hold out, hoping for a quick resolution, but the financial strain proved overwhelming for most. Many closed, leaving workers unemployed and unpaid. The ripple effects were immediate. Families lost their livelihoods, and entire communities dependent on factory jobs were thrown into crisis. China's official manufacturing PMI plunged to a 16-month low, while retail sales and industrial production also slowed. The stock market tumbled, and investor confidence evaporated almost overnight. Beijing retaliated with tariffs of its own, but this did little to help factories that had already lost their biggest clients. The government scrambled to offer support, but the scale of the crisis was unprecedented. The trade war exposed the risks of China's heavy dependence on the U.S. market. Years of prioritizing exports to America had left many companies dangerously vulnerable to sudden policy shifts. The sudden loss of business created a vacuum other markets couldn't fill, triggering a painful economic reckoning. Attempts to pivot to new markets or domestic consumption fell short, leaving a gaping hole in the economy. The true human cost of these geopolitical maneuvers would soon become tragically clear, as families struggled to make ends meet and uncertainty became the new normal for millions across China. The economic pain quickly erupted into public displays of anger and desperation. As factories shuttered and projects stalled, the frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over. In cities and towns across China, workers who had once fueled the nation's rapid growth now found themselves left behind, their voices rising in protest. In Guangdong, the Shenzhen Weilixing Toys Company abruptly shut its doors after U.S. orders dried up, leaving 400 workers jobless and unpaid. The closure was sudden, with little warning, and the workers, many of whom had traveled far from their hometowns for these jobs, were left stranded, uncertain of their futures. They protested outside the factory demanding their wages. For many, these wages were not just a paycheck, but a lifeline for their families back home. Similar unrest echoed in Hubei, where workers on the Yangshin Expressway project protested over months of unpaid wages. Even state-backed projects were no longer a guarantee of a steady paycheck. The sense of betrayal ran deep, as workers realized that even government contracts could not shield them from economic uncertainty. In Nanning, 32 construction workers set up camp outside their company's offices, cooking and sleeping on the pavement to demand their pay. Their determination was clear. They would not leave until their voices were heard and their grievances addressed. These protests, from factory towns to construction sites, paint a vivid picture of a country in turmoil. The unrest was spreading, and each new protest inspired others to stand up for their rights. The primary grievance was unpaid wages, a basic right denied. For many it was not just about money but about dignity and survival. These were not political protests but cries for economic justice from ordinary people pushed to the brink. Their demands were simple: fair pay for honest work and a chance to provide for their families. The government's promise of stability was being tested as never before. Authorities watched nervously, aware that each protest could spark a wider movement. The protest became a daily visible reminder of broken promises. Streets that once bustled with commerce now echoed with chants for justice. Across China, workers were refusing to be ignored. Their solidarity grew stronger with each passing day, as more joined the call for change. The social contract between workers, companies, and the state was breaking down. Trust, once taken for granted, was now in short supply. Economic hardship was now a public, national crisis. The protests were no longer isolated incidents. They had become a symbol of a deeper, widespread struggle facing millions across the country. The wave of unrest spread beyond factories and construction sites, revealing the depth of the crisis. Public sector employees, teachers, healthcare staff, sanitation workers found themselves unpaid for months. In Shandong, contract teachers earning modest salaries took to the streets, highlighting that even essential public services were affected. Protests erupted in provinces from Zhejiang to Gansu, showing the downturn was a national contagion. The sight of teachers and nurses protesting sent a powerful message. The crisis had breached the walls of the state. The government's failure to pay its own employees signaled a deeper financial fragility. The economic turmoil was no longer just about trade. It threatened the very stability of Chinese society. At the root of the crisis is a severe debt problem engulfing China's local governments. For years they relied on land sales to property developers to fund operations. But the property market's collapse has left them buried in debt and unable to pay workers or contractors. The central government rolled out a 10 trillion yuan rescue package, but even this may not be enough. The underlying issue, the collapse of the land sale model, remains unresolved. Some local authorities have resorted to new fees and fines, stoking public anger as services deteriorate. The debt crisis is crippling the state's ability to function and eroding public trust. Economic hardship is tearing at China's social fabric, fueling a surge in protests and violence. The China Dissent Monitor tracked a 21% rise in citizen demonstrations, with 75% tied to economic grievances. More alarming is the rise in revenge against society attacks, public stabbings and car rammings, leaving over 60 dead and 160 injured in the past year. In Zhuhai, a man rammed his car into a crowd, killing 35 and injuring 43, a shocking act of despair. The state's response was swift and severe, but such violence stems from deep economic and social frustration. Organized protest and random violence both signal a dangerous erosion of stability. The government's promise of prosperity is being broken for many. Each new protest and attack is a sign of immense pressure on society. Beijing is walking a tightrope, stimulating the economy while tightening control. President Xi acknowledged the economic headwinds, and Premier Li Qiang set a 5% GDP growth target, unveiling new stimulus measures and raising the fiscal deficit. Special government bonds aim to boost domestic consumption, but Li admitted the recovery's foundation is weak. Meanwhile, the government has ramped up its security apparatus, allowing some protests but cracking down hard on anything organized or political. Police surveillance has increased, both online and on the streets. This dual approach, stimulus and repression, reflects the immense pressure on China's leaders. Pumping money into the economy may not solve deep structural problems. Heavy-handed repression risks further alienating a population already suffering from economic anxiety. Amid escalating tensions, a glimmer of hope appeared in May 2025. Secret talks in Washington led to a fragile truce. The U.S. agreed to cut tariffs from 145% to 30% for 90 days. Both sides claimed victory, and financial markets responded with cautious optimism. Goldman Sachs lowered its U.S. recession forecast, but analysts warned this was only a temporary pause. The core issues, trade deficits, intellectual property, market access, and state subsidies, remain unresolved. The 90-day truce simply postpones the inevitable confrontation. The next 3 months are critical. Negotiations will determine if a stable trade relationship is possible or if the cycle of tariffs will resume. For Chinese factories and workers, this truce offers a brief window of hope. The future of the global economy hangs in the balance. As of mid-June 2025, China stands at a critical juncture, its future uncertain. The nation faces a perfect storm economic downturn, local government debt, and rising social unrest. The government's response, a mix of stimulus and control, is a high-wire act with no guarantee of success. The next 90 days will be pivotal. If trade talks succeed, some recovery may begin. If not, the crisis will deepen. More factory closures and protests could force harsher repression, risking a cycle of discontent and crackdown. A prolonged slump would challenge the Communist Party's legitimacy and destabilize the global economy. The world watches, its own prosperity tied to China's fate. The coming months will reveal whether the storm will pass or if the worst is yet to come.